Sign here, Mom. It's just paperwork. That's what my daughter said, sliding the document across the kitchen table like it was nothing more than a grocery list, like the last 72 years of my life could be reduced to a signature at the bottom of a page I hadn't even finished reading yet. I looked down at the paper, then back up at her face, calm, practiced, almost impatient, and for a moment I said nothing because silence has a way of revealing more than questions ever could. Jason stood behind her, arms crossed, watching me the way you watch a machine you're not sure still works, waiting to see if I'd hesitate, waiting to see if I'd ask for help, waiting to confirm what they had already decided about me. It's just a standard authorization, Emily added, her voice softer now, almost rehearsed, like she'd practiced sounding patient in front of a mirror. You don't need to worry about the details. We'll handle everything. I nodded slowly, letting the words settle in the air between us, letting them think I was absorbing it the way they expected me to, the way someone clueless would. Because that's what they had been calling me, not to my face at first, but I had heard enough. Fragments of conversations that stopped when I entered the room, messages that lingered just a second too long on a phone screen, that word repeated like a quiet verdict. Clueless. Clueless about money. Clueless about accounts. Clueless about everything that mattered. I picked up the pen, felt its weight in my hand, and for a second, I let it hover above the line where my name was already printed, neat and official, as if it had been waiting there all along. Do you want me to walk you through it? Jason asked, stepping closer now, his tone careful but edged with something sharper underneath. I shook my head. No, I said, my voice steady, quieter than theirs, but firm enough that it made him pause. I can read. The room went still for just a second, just long enough for them to realize I wasn't moving as quickly as they had planned. I lowered the pen back onto the table without signing, aligning it perfectly beside the document, then folded my hands in my lap like I had all the time in the world. Emily forced a small smile. Mom, we're just trying to help you. Managing all this on your own, it's a lot. I looked at her then, really looked at her, at the daughter I had raised on double shifts and late-night budgeting sessions, at the woman who now spoke to me like I was something fragile and outdated. I know, I said softly. It is a lot. And then I pushed the paper back toward her, just a few inches, just enough to make a point without raising my voice. I'll think about it. She blinked, surprised, and Jason's jaw tightened just slightly, but neither of them argued, not yet. They thought this was a delay. They thought I needed time to understand. What they didn't realize was that I already did. I didn't sign that day. And 6 weeks later, every account they thought they were about to control was gone. I did not bring it up again that night, and neither did they, but I could feel it sitting between us at dinner, unspoken and heavy, like something already decided that I had not agreed to yet. Emily talked about work, about a client in Chicago, about numbers and projections she assumed I would not understand, and Jason nodded along, occasionally glancing at me as if measuring how much I was following. I listened the way I always had, quietly, carefully, storing details they thought I would forget, because people reveal more when they believe you are not keeping track. When they left, the house felt larger than usual, too quiet in a way that pressed against my chest, but I did not turn on the television or call anyone. Instead, I walked to the small desk in the corner of my living room, the one with the drawer that still stuck halfway unless you pulled it at just the right angle, and I took out the old folder I had been keeping for years. It was not impressive. No sleek binders, no digital dashboards, just paper, neatly organized, statements going back decades, every account, every transfer, every decision I had made when there was no one else to make it. I ran my fingers along the edges, steady now, not shaking, not uncertain, just remembering. They thought I did not understand money because I did not talk about it. They thought I was out of touch because I did not use the same apps, the same words, the same confident tone. But I had balanced a household on less than $40,000 a year once. I had paid off a mortgage early. I had turned small savings into something that could carry me through the rest of my life without asking anyone for help. I knew exactly what I had, and more importantly, I knew exactly who had access to it. That was the part that kept me sitting there longer than I expected. Access. I said the word out loud, testing how it felt. Joint accounts. Old permissions. Emergency contacts that had not been updated in years. Small things, easy to overlook, easy to assume were harmless. I closed my eyes for a moment and replayed the conversation at the table, the way Jason had said authorization, the way Emily had said we will handle everything, and something inside me settled into place. Not fear, not anger. Something colder and more precise. Clarity. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls before 9 o'clock. I did not rush. I did not raise my voice. I asked questions, simple ones, the kind that sound harmless until you listen closely. Who has access to this account? What permissions are currently active? What changes can be made without my physical presence? The woman at the bank recognized my voice after the second call. She had processed my transactions for years. Her tone shifted slightly, more attentive, more careful. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Collins?" she asked. I smiled even though she could not see me. "I just want to make sure everything is exactly the way I intend it to be," I said. By the time I hung up, I had a list written in front of me, names, account numbers, steps. It was longer than I expected, but not overwhelming. Just work. The kind of work I had done my entire life without anyone noticing. I did not tell Emily. I did not mention the paper again. When she texted me 2 days later asking if I had had time to review it, I replied with a single sentence. "I am still thinking about it." She responded with a thumbs-up emoji, casual, unconcerned, exactly as I knew she would. They thought time was on their side. They thought I was hesitating. Because I was confused. They did not understand that I was not hesitating at all. I was preparing. I did not always live this way, quietly calculating, measuring every word before I spoke, every move before I made it, but life has a way of teaching you precision when you do not have the luxury of mistakes. There was a time when money was not something anyone explained to me. When I married at 22, I trusted my husband to handle it all, the bills, the accounts, the decisions that seemed too complicated for someone who had never been taught. And then one winter morning, when Emily was just 7 years old, that trust disappeared along with him, leaving behind a stack of unpaid notices on the kitchen counter and a silence that felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. I remember standing there in that small house, the heat barely working, holding an envelope marked urgent, and realizing that no one was coming to fix it for me. That was the day I stopped being unsure. That was the day I learned. I took a job I was not prepared for, sitting behind a desk in a local office, filing numbers I did not yet understand, staying late after everyone else had gone home so I could teach myself what those numbers meant. I learned how accounts worked, how interest grew, how small decisions made over years could turn into something solid, something dependable. I made mistakes in the beginning, small ones, careful ones, but I paid attention and I did not repeat them. Every dollar I earned had a purpose. Every bill was tracked. Every account was checked. When Emily wanted new shoes, I made sure we could afford them. When she needed books for school, I found a way. I did not tell her how tight things were. I did not tell her how many nights I sat at that same desk, calculator in hand, making sure we would be all right. She saw stability, not the work behind it. And that was my choice. Over the years, the numbers changed. The balances grew. I paid off the house earlier than expected. I built savings slowly, deliberately, never chasing quick gains, never trusting anything I did not fully understand. I kept records of everything, not because I was afraid, but because I respected what it took to build it. And somewhere along the way, as Emily grew older and moved into her own life, the story she told herself about me changed. I was no longer the woman who held everything together. I was the woman who needed help. I saw it in the way she explained things to me, simplifying words that did not need to be simplified, repeating details as if I could not follow. I let her. I nodded. I asked the occasional question that made me sound uncertain. It was easier that way. Easier than correcting her. Easier than revealing everything I knew. Because when people believe you do not understand, they stop hiding their intentions. They speak more freely. They plan more openly. They underestimate you. And being underestimated is a very quiet advantage. So when she called me clueless, whether she meant for me to hear it or not, I did not take it as an insult. I took it as information. I took it as confirmation that she had already decided who I was in her mind. And once someone decides that, they stop looking closely. They stop asking careful questions. They assume the outcome is already theirs. That assumption is where they make their biggest mistake. Because while Emily was building her version of me, I was still the same woman who had once turned unpaid bills into a life with no debt, the same woman who had spent decades making sure every dollar was exactly where it needed to be. I had not forgotten anything. I had simply stopped correcting her. And now, sitting at that same desk years later, with a fresh list in front of me and a clear understanding of what needed to be done, I realized something that felt almost like relief. I did not need them to understand me. I only needed them to keep underestimating me a little longer. I did not move everything at once because that would have been careless, and carelessness is how people lose what they spent a lifetime building, so I started with the smallest accounts, the ones no one pays attention to. The ones Emily would never think to check because they did not look important enough to matter. The first transfer was under $10,000, routine, almost invisible, the kind of movement that would not trigger questions or alerts, and I watched it settle into the new account I had opened quietly the day before, under my name alone. No joint access, no shared permissions, just control. I waited 24 hours before doing anything else, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to see if anyone noticed. No calls came. No messages. No sudden concern from Emily asking if something had changed. That told me everything I needed to know. They were not watching the details. They were waiting for the signature. The next step was larger, a retirement account I had built over decades, carefully balanced, never touched without reason. I scheduled an appointment in person for that one because some decisions deserve to be handled face to face. The bank manager greeted me by name when I walked in, the same man who had helped me years ago when I first consolidated my accounts after paying off the house. He smiled politely, the way people do when they assume they know why you are there. "Planning for the future," he said. I returned the smile, calm, measured. "I have been planning for the future for a long time," I replied. We sat down, and I explained exactly what I wanted, no hesitation, no confusion, no need for simplification. His expression shifted slightly as I spoke, not dramatically, just enough to show he was adjusting his expectations. I was not the woman Emily described. I never had been. I transferred the funds into a protected structure, one that required my direct authorization for any movement, one that could not be accessed by anyone else without clear documentation and verification. It was not complicated. It was precise. When I left the bank, the air outside felt sharper, cleaner, as if something had settled into place that had been waiting for a long time. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued, one account at a time, spacing each action carefully, never rushing, never drawing attention. I updated beneficiaries. I removed outdated permissions. I closed accounts that no longer served a purpose and opened new ones where only I held the key. Each step was small on its own, but together they formed something solid, something final. Emily called. Once during that time, casual, checking in, asking if I had made a decision about the paperwork. I kept my voice even. "I am still reviewing it," I said. She sighed softly, not frustrated, not yet, just mildly inconvenienced. "Okay, Mom, just let me know. We want to make sure everything is set up properly." I agreed, the same way I always had, and when the call ended, I placed my phone down and looked at the list in front of me again. There were only 2 items left. The largest accounts. The ones they believed would define everything. I did not rush those either. I waited until the timing was right, until every other piece was already in place, until there was nothing left exposed, nothing left that could be reached without my consent. Because this was never about reacting. It was about control. And by the time I was finished, there would be nothing left for them to take, not because I had hidden it, but because I had moved it somewhere they could never reach. I left the largest accounts untouched until the very end because those were the ones they were watching, even if they did not realize they were watching them, the ones tied to the house, the long-term investments, The funds that had grown slowly over decades and now sat there quietly carrying the weight of every careful decision I had ever made. Those accounts were not just numbers. They were history. They were proof. And moving them required more than a phone call or a quick signature. It required timing. Emily invited me over that Sunday, said she wanted to go through the paperwork together, said it would be easier if we just sat down and finalized everything. I agreed, of course. I always agreed. When I arrived, the papers were already laid out on the dining table, neat, organized, prepared as if the outcome had already been decided before I walked through the door. Jason poured coffee. Emily smiled. It looked like concern, but I recognized it for what it was. Expectation. We just want to make sure everything is protected, she said, tapping the top page lightly. You know, in case anything happens. I sat down across from her and looked at the document again, slower this time, letting my eyes move across each line as if I were trying to understand it, even though I had already read enough to know exactly what it would give them. Power of attorney. Full access. Immediate control. I placed my hands flat on the table and nodded once. It is a lot to think about, I said. Jason leaned forward slightly. That is why we are here, Margaret. We can handle it for you. I looked at him, then back at Emily, and for a moment I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them believe I might finally give in. Then I reached for the pen again. Not to sign. Just to hold it. I will take care of it tomorrow, I said calmly, setting the pen back down in the exact same place. Emily blinked, surprised again, her patience thinning just slightly at the edges. Tomorrow, she repeated. Yes, I said. I want to go to the bank in person. Jason opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. That was the moment I knew. They needed my signature. They could not do it without me. And that meant I still had control. I left shortly after that, taking nothing with me, leaving the papers behind, letting them believe the process was still moving in the direction they wanted. The next morning, I went to the bank before it opened. I did not wait in line. I did not explain more than necessary. I sat across from the manager again and gave clear instructions. The final transfers. The consolidation. The removal of any remaining shared access. The locking of accounts under new conditions that required my direct authorization for any change. He listened carefully, more carefully than before, and when I finished, he asked one question. Are you certain? I met his eyes without hesitation. I have never been more certain of anything. The paperwork was completed within the hour. Signatures made. Verifications processed. Everything moved exactly where it needed to go. When I walked out of that building, there was nothing left behind for anyone else to reach. Not a dollar. Not a permission. Not a single open door. That afternoon, my phone rang. Emily's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was tight, controlled, but different now. Mom, she said. I tried to log into one of the accounts. It says access denied. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window, calm in a way I had not felt in a long time. Yes, I said quietly. That sounds right. There was a pause on the line after I said that, not long, just a second or two, but long enough for me to hear the shift in her breathing, the moment where confusion started turning into something sharper, something closer to panic. What do you mean that sounds right? Emily asked, her voice tighter now, no longer softened for my sake, no longer patient. I did not rush to answer. I let the silence stretch just a little longer, the same way I had done at the table, the same way I had done all my life when something mattered. It means, I said evenly, that the account is no longer accessible the way it used to be. There was movement on her end, the sound of something being set down too quickly, maybe her phone, maybe a laptop, I could not tell, but I could picture it clearly enough. Mom, I cannot log into any of them, she said, faster now, words coming closer together. The savings, the retirement account, even the joint one we set up years ago. It is all restricted. Did you change something? I leaned back in my chair, looking at the same window, the same quiet street I had looked at for years, and for the first time, I did not feel the need to explain myself carefully. Yes, I said. Another pause, shorter this time, sharper. Why would you do that without telling me? she asked, and there it was. Not concern, not confusion, but something else, something closer to entitlement, as if information about my own accounts was something she deserved by default. I kept my tone level. Because it is my responsibility, I replied. She let out a breath, not quite a laugh, not quite frustration, something in between. Mom, you do not have to handle this alone. That is why we were trying to help you. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be. I heard Jason in the background then, his voice lower, asking what was going on, and she covered the phone slightly, but not enough. She moved everything, Emily whispered, and I could almost see the look they were exchanging, the disbelief, the sudden recalculation. I waited. Mom, she said again, louder now, we need to fix this. There are things tied to those accounts. Payments. Plans. We cannot just have everything locked like this. I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of stress, but out of clarity, because this was the moment where everything became visible. Not what they said they needed. What they actually needed. Access. Control. Certainty. You can still access what belongs to you, I said calmly. Nothing that is yours has been taken away. There was silence again, heavier this time. What does that mean? She asked, slower now, cautious. I opened my eyes and looked down at the folder still sitting on my desk, every document in its place, every account exactly where I intended it to be. It means, I said, choosing each word carefully, that anything in my name is now under my control only. The line went quiet, completely quiet this time. No background noise, no movement, just stillness. And in that stillness, I knew she understood. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to realize that the version of me she had been working with no longer existed. Or maybe it never had. We need to talk about this in person, she said finally, her voice steadier now, but colder. I nodded, even though she could not see me. Yes, I said. We do. And when the call ended, I placed my phone down gently, not with relief, not with anger, just with certainty, because for the first time in a long time, the conversation was no longer about what they wanted from me. It was about what I had already decided. They arrived earlier than I expected the next day, not calling ahead this time, not asking if it was a good moment, just showing up at my door like urgency had replaced courtesy overnight. I opened it before they could knock a second time, and for a brief second, I saw it clearly on their faces, not anger, not yet, but something unsettled, something that did not fit the version of the situation they had been holding on to. We need to understand what you did, Emily said as she stepped inside, her voice controlled, but tighter than before. Jason followed behind her, quieter, watching everything, taking in the room the same way he had watched me at the table. I closed the door gently and walked past them into the living room without rushing, letting them follow instead of leading. Control is not always about speaking first. Sometimes it is about deciding where the conversation happens. Sit down, I said, not as a request, but not harsh either, just direct, and they did. I took my seat across from them, the same chair I had sat in for years, and placed the folder on the table between us. I did not open it right away. I let it sit there, visible, solid, something they could not ignore. You said you wanted to understand, I began, my voice even, steady, so I will explain it once. Emily leaned forward slightly. Mom, we're not trying to fight with you. We just need access restored. There are things we have already planned around those accounts. I nodded slowly. I know, I said. That is why I changed them. The words landed differently this time. Not defensive. Not uncertain. Final. Jason shifted in his seat. Margaret, this is not just about you anymore, he said carefully. We were trying to help manage everything before something went wrong. I looked at him, not unkindly, but without hesitation. Nothing was wrong, I replied. You just assumed it was. Emily exhaled sharply. We assumed it because you do not keep up with this stuff anymore, she said, the edge finally breaking through. You do not even use online banking half the time. You ask me to check things for you. I let that sit for a moment, not interrupting, not correcting her immediately. Then I reached forward and opened the folder. Inside were statements, confirmations, updated documents, every account listed, every change documented, every permission clearly defined. I turned it toward them slowly. Look closer, I said. They did. At first, it was just scanning, quick, dismissive, the way people read when they expect to find something simple. Then it slowed. Their eyes moved more carefully. Jason leaned in further. Emily's expression shifted, piece by piece, as recognition replaced assumption. These are all recent, she said. Quietly. Yes, I replied. Every single account. Jason pointed to one page. This transfer, this amount. When did you do this? Over the past 3 weeks, I said. One step at a time. Emily looked up at me then, really looked this time, not at the version she had decided on, but at the person sitting in front of her. You moved everything, she said, not asking, just stating it now. I nodded once. Yes. Silence filled the room again, heavier than before, because now it was not confusion. It was realization. Why would you do that, she asked, softer now, but more serious, more careful. I met her eyes without raising my voice. Because you thought I could not, I said. That was the moment everything changed, not because of what I had taken away, but because of what they had just understood. They had not been managing my life. They had been waiting to take control of it. And now there was nothing left for them to take. Emily did not look at me the same way after that, not with that quiet certainty she used to carry, not with that subtle confidence that came from believing she understood everything already. Now there was hesitation in her eyes, calculation, the kind that comes when someone realizes they have been missing pieces of the picture all along. Jason was the first to speak again, his tone measured but no longer relaxed. This does not make sense, he said, tapping one of the pages in the folder. You moved retirement funds, liquid accounts, even the long-term investments. That is not something you just do without a plan. I held his gaze calmly. You are right, I said. It is not. Emily leaned back slowly, folding her arms, trying to regain some control of the conversation, but it was different now, forced instead of natural. Then what is the plan, she asked. Because right now, it looks like you just shut us out completely. I did not answer immediately. I reached into the folder and pulled out one more document, placing it on the table in front of them, separate from the rest. It was newer, cleaner, signed just that morning. Emily glanced down at it, then back at me, confused for a brief second before she read the heading. Her expression changed almost instantly. What is this? She asked, her voice quieter now, more cautious. That, I said, is the updated structure for everything that belongs to me. Jason leaned closer, reading more carefully this time, no longer skimming, no longer assuming. You created a trust, he said slowly. I nodded. Yes. Emily shook her head slightly, as if trying to reassemble something that no longer fit. Why would you do that without talking to us? She asked. I let out a small breath, not frustration, just acknowledgement. Because the last time we talked about it, you had already decided what I should do, I said. The room went quiet again, but this silence was different. It was not confusion anymore. It was confrontation without raised voices. Jason pointed to another section. These conditions, he said, access limitations, distribution controls, this is locked down. It is protected, I corrected gently. Emily looked up at me again, and this time there was no softness left in her expression. Protected from who? She asked. I met her eyes directly. From anyone who thinks they are entitled to it, I said. The words landed exactly where they needed to. She inhaled slowly, holding it for a second before speaking again. We were trying to help you, she said, but the sentence did not carry the same weight anymore. It sounded thinner now, less certain. No, I replied quietly. You were trying to manage something you believed I could not. Jason shifted again, his tone sharpening slightly. Margaret, this changes things. There were expectations. Plans. I nodded once. I am aware. Emily's voice came next, softer, but edged with something new. So what happens now? She asked. I leaned back slightly, folding my hands in my lap the same way I had done the day they first placed that paper in front of me. Now, I said calmly, everything stays exactly where I put it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The weight of that sentence settled slowly, but completely. There was no argument that could undo it. No signature they could still ask for. No access left to restore. The control they thought they were about to gain had never actually been within reach. And 4. The first time since they walked into my house that afternoon, I could see it clearly in their faces. Not anger. Not yet. But something much closer to understanding. They had not lost something that belonged to them. They had simply discovered it was never theirs to begin with. I did not raise my voice after that because there was no reason to, not anymore, not when everything that needed to be said had already been placed on the table in front of them in ink and paper and decisions that could not be undone with another conversation. Emily sat there for a long moment, her hands still, her eyes moving across the documents again as if reading them a second time might change what they meant, but it did not. Jason leaned back slightly, his expression more guarded now, less certain, as if he was recalculating something that no longer added up the way he expected. "So that is it," Emily said finally, her voice quieter, not sharp, not emotional, just different, like she was speaking from a place she had not planned to reach. I nodded once. "That is it," I said. There was no anger in me when I said it, no satisfaction either, just clarity, the kind that comes after you stop waiting for someone else to understand and accept that they may never do so. "We were trying to be involved," she said, not looking at me this time, her gaze still fixed on the table. "I know," I replied. "But being involved is not the same as being in control." She let out a slow breath, and for a moment, I saw something familiar in her again. Not the version of her that had been sitting across from me these past weeks, but the girl who used to watch me balance bills at the kitchen counter, who used to believe I could handle anything without help. "You could have told me," she said softly. I shook my head slightly. "I did," I said. "You just decided not to believe me." That was the truth of it, simple, direct, without accusation. Jason stood first, adjusting his jacket, his movements more restrained now, as if he understood that pushing further would not change anything. Emily followed a second later, slower, still holding the edge of the table for a moment before letting go. They did not argue. They did not ask again for access. There was nothing left to ask for. I walked them to the door the same way I always had, calm, steady, not rushing them out, not holding them back. When Emily stepped outside, she paused, just for a second, turning slightly as if she wanted to say something else, something different, but then she stopped herself. "We will talk later," she said. I nodded. "We will," I replied. And then they left. The house was quiet again after the door closed, the same quiet I had known for years, but it felt different now, not heavy, not empty, just still. I walked back to the living room and sat down, the folder still open on the table, every page exactly where I had placed it. I did not feel like I had won anything because this was never about winning. It was about stopping something before it went too far. It was about recognizing the moment when help turns into control and deciding not to accept it. I looked at my hands resting in my lap, steady, certain, the same hands that had built everything they had just tried to take responsibility for. I had not changed. I had not suddenly become someone else. I had simply stopped allowing myself to be seen as less than what I was. And if there was anything I understood now more clearly than ever, it was this. I did not lose anything that day. I let go of the idea that love meant giving up control of your own life. And I was not going to pick that idea back up again.